Chief Minister in closing.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And I thank everyone for their contribution to debate today. It was incredibly important that we came to Parliament today to deal with an issue that required the urgent attention of the Parliament. And I appreciate very much those members who have spoken today, and certainly to Labor and the member for Nightcliff in supporting this legislation. I'd like to thank from my team, the Deputy Chief Minister, the Attorney-General, Member for Sanderson, Karama, Breitling, Blaine and Catherine. Thank you very much for your contributions. And I'd just like to respond to some of the issues raised by the opposition and independent members. And I echo the sentiments of the opposition leader. She said that, Mr Fike made it such a welcoming and loved space. And I thought that was really well put. We've had an outpouring of support from a community who is grieving, and it's been a very consistent message, and certainly Margaret and her family it just must be the most incredible people, Madam Speaker, to have an entire community feel their grief and make it their own. Whilst the opposition will be supporting the bill, the opposition leader did say that she held some reservations about it. And I just want to acknowledge right from the outset her comments around not knowing about the fact that this legislation included the removal of the principle of detention as last resort. And I note that the opposition leader herself was not at the briefing, so perhaps she can be forgiven for not having had the information passed on, but I certainly won't accept the accusation that that wasn't provided, because it was indeed brought up, and in fact the member for Nightcliff reinforced the fact that the first she heard of it was at the briefing yesterday. And so I just want to correct the record on that point, Madam Speaker. We've certainly foreshadowed publicly for a very long time that we are undertaking a rewrite of the Youth Justice Act. That it comes as no surprise to anyone. I certainly talk about it on radio every week and have done for months now. And as part of that Youth Justice Act rewrite, what we have been looking at is this principle that Labor put into it around detention as a last resort. Something that came from the Royal Commission, of which since that time, things really have never been worse. And so we make no apologies for removing this presumption, this principle. It is an unnecessary complication to what is an already very complicated space. And whilst it was on the cards as part of the rewrite, it was something we could bring forward. And whilst we insert a principle that has this overarching impact of making sure that community safety is the number one consideration in granting bail, we also remove a principle which says the number one priority has to be that the young person is not detained or embarrassed. Now, these are matters that needn't be the consideration of the decision maker around a young person's embarrassment, around being bailed or not, or whether or not detention acts as a last resort. They will still have all of the protections and processes under the legislation, but it will not be an overarching principle. We also had the opposition leader talk about it being a band-aid solution and doesn't address systemic issues. But what I wanted to comment on from the outset, Madam Speaker, is those opposite all seem to think that as a government you can only do one thing at a time. And certainly I believe that is how Labor operated, if they could even do one thing at a time, Madam Speaker. But this concept or this idea that those opposite think that you can't deal with the pointy end and have stronger laws and better powers for our police and more prison beds and a more efficient court system and not tackle the root causes of crime at the same time is quite frankly ridiculous. And if those opposite are so proud of their legacy during their 8 years in government about what they were doing around root causes, I've got a news flash for them. They're all still in place. And if they were working that well, we might not be in this situation. But in fact, Madam Speaker, we've rolled over that funding for another 12 months to give some of these service providers the benefit of the doubt as we go through that important work of checking what are the KPIs, what are the outcomes we want and need, what actual benefit are we deriving in the territory. But you can't have your cake and eat it too, Madam Speaker, and that's something that I think those opposite just don't understand. We have done more to deal with the root causes of crime and the immediate safety of the community in 8 months than Labor did in 8 years. Not only is everything you were doing still happening, but we have gone far above and beyond anything you could have ever dreamt of. So yes, we have stronger laws because you know what? We need them. And I challenge anyone to go out to the community and tell them that we don't. We have brought online more than 500 prison beds, 500, and we've filled every single one of them, plus some. Now, you can't tell me this hasn't made the community safer, which is the allegation of those opposite, when there are 600 more people in prison in the last 8 months than there were before. It is inherently safer when a person who is a threat to the community is no longer in the community. And to follow the logic of the member for Johnson, who made a similar comment, as did the opposition leader, around saying that it didn't make, not bailing someone didn't make the community any safer. I just can't understand or follow the logic. If in New South Wales they had a 32% increase in remand because a test was applied to say that people who are a risk to the community should not be allowed out, that means 32% increase would otherwise have been people on the street who did present a risk to the community. This is what we're talking about. And so you can't have it both ways. You can't not send people who are a high risk to the community to jail and you can't leave those people on the street and expect this community to be safe. It just doesn't happen. And so you cannot say that it doesn't work because by its very nature, it vetted out a 32% increase of people who were identified by the judiciary as being a high risk to community safety. It is exactly the desired intention we are standing here to deliver. We want to make sure we have the strongest, most robust possible system to make sure that only people who do not present a risk to the community are bailed. And they are absolutely able to be bailed and await their day in court, Madam Speaker. But it's very easy to be critical, and it's much harder to come in with realistic and tangible solutions. And what we hear from those opposite really sometimes is like this, I just don't know what their alternative is. You either have someone who's a risk to the community on the street or they're in prison. Where is this magical other place that you want them to go? Because Labor certainly didn't have a magical other place. We're working hard to deliver boot camps, to deliver work camps as part of our corrections master plan that, again, we created, I think within 6 weeks of government. It was very quick that we got to work. Again, we brought online those 500 beds. And ultimately, we have to do what works. There was a lot of talk around evidence. And again, going back, I think the opposition leader raised evidence, a member for Johnson raised evidence. Well, the evidence is that 32% of people were remanded because they were a risk to the community. I don't know what other evidence you would need to suggest that that means it worked. But that doesn't mean we can't do all those other things. And today I was able to talk about some of the numbers that we have of rehabilitation in prison. So despite an extra 600 offenders in prison, despite having to bring online over 500 beds across the territory, despite a shortage in prison staff, despite all of those challenges in which corrections has risen to and exceeded our expectation, they have done an incredible job. They have also been able to increase the number of completed rehabilitation programs in the system despite all of those challenges. We have improved numbers on Labor's numbers when Labor wasn't doing anything about this. They weren't increasing, they weren't arresting people like we are. They weren't building new beds like we are. And so we saw that corrections have delivered educational programs. We had 671 prisoners in 2025 complete educational programs compared to 553 the year before. When it comes to the family violence program that they run inside prison, there were 103 completions versus 95. Now, a small increase, but an increase nonetheless It is going up despite the challenges corrections are facing. We saw the RAGE program, which is an intensive 6-month-long DV program in prison. And this is incredible. And actually, I think it was a member for Nightcliff who might have criticised this as being a small number. Sure, 41 people completing a program out of, nearly 3,000 prisoners. That is absolutely a small number. But when you compare 41 completions of a 6-month program to 12 under Labor, that is absolutely fantastic. That is absolutely fantastic. And do we want more? Absolutely. And that's why we're doing the work to look at how we mandate programs in prison. There was also criticism by those opposite, I think, again, going back to the member for Nightcliff, around why aren't we making sure people on bail are undertaking rehabilitation. We'd love to. It's work we're looking at, but again, someone on remand. Someone on remand is not a sentenced prisoner. And so again, there are limitations in what you can force someone in remand to do versus someone in prison. But that is work we're exploring nonetheless, Madam Speaker. But again, if we just had a more practical and realistic conversation about this, we would get closer to being able to find and deliver the answers that are needed. But those program numbers are truly unbelievable. And just over the Easter break in corrections at the Holtz Youth Detention Centre, we had 5 male and 2 female prisoners there do 4-day barista training. All of them got their accreditation. We had 17 young people also get their white card over that period. And the number of programs we run in prison would probably, there'd be a lot of Territory families out there wishing that their kids could get access to these programs, Madam Speaker. I can tell you, you can get a Certificate 1 in Agriculture, a Certificate 2 in Retail Services. You can get a Certificate 2 in Horticulture, Community Services. You can get a licence for a forklift if you're in prison, a white card. You can get food handling skills, Certificate 2 in Visual Arts, Certificate in General Education, English Numeracy, Test and Tag, Construction, First Aid. You name it, Madam Speaker. And in terms of addressing the therapy that people require, intensive drug and alcohol, safe, sober and strong, family violence program, addictive behaviours program, sex offender treatment programs, through care coordinators, the list goes on and on and on, Madam Speaker. And as I said, that's the stuff that Labor left behind. That's just the stuff that's continuing. We haven't even geared up. We have not even geared up yet on rehabilitation because we have been so focused on the pointy end. So when those opposite want to paint the CLP as just our answer to everything, is the stuff at the pointy end, you're absolutely wrong, because we're doing all of it simultaneously. And in 8 months, we can all be very proud of where we've taken the Territory from and to, despite obviously it not being anywhere near enough. And we are on record time and time again as saying this is just the beginning, and it is. And we are seeing some really early results. Again, we've got the opposition wanting to have trickery around the crime statistics. And yeah, absolutely, we are seeing serious violent offending happen. And you know what? The young people who are turning 18, and we're seeing that high teen age bracket with knife offending and other serious violent offending, they were 10 years old when Labor came to power, Madam Speaker, 10 years old. And from 10 years old, those kids have not known a system that held them accountable. And you know one thing that not one of those opposite talked about, Madam Speaker, but the member for Catherine brought it up? You never, ever hear Labor talk about parental responsibility or personal responsibility. And that's how they ran the Territory. And that's why kids who are 18 now, from the day they turn 10, have known nothing else other than to effectively operate above the law. And that is a shame, because that's missed the opportunity for intervention in their lives, Madam Speaker, which is again what we're doing. And I take you back to some additional data. You know, we've been working really hard in children and families on circuit breaker and family responsibility. Under Labor, member for Breitling, you used to ask tirelessly about how many family responsibility agreements there were under Labor. I'm not even sure if they had any done by the time they left government, but we've signed 85. And as the Attorney General said, that's 85 families we're working intensively with around keeping parents accountable for their obligations for their children. 85. We've had 113 circuit breaker cases, and they're open cases. We've had 27 young people taken to safe places, and the cohorts that we're looking at are the younger ones. They're between 10, 11, 12, 13, that age bracket, exactly the age bracket we need to get to so that these kids do not turn into adult criminals. And that, again, you want to talk about root causes, you want to talk about doing the hard work. That is what we have done in just 8 months, Madam Speaker. I commend the Education Minister. Again, school attendance, so fundamentally important. And yet Labor would never hold a parent accountable for sending their child to school, even though it was the law. We've not changed the law about that. That is the law. It has been the law for forever. And so it's exciting to see the data, Pepper Minardi School, Wooliana School, Centralian Middle School, Gillen Primary School, Gapawiak School, Milik Borough, Minyeri, Gumbalanya, Jabiru, Warrawee, Borroloola, Robinson River. The list goes on, Madam Speaker. Batchelor, Nungalamba. There is an incredible number of schools, Ramangini and more, who are seeing increases in school attendance. Again, just 8 months in, and that is the work we're doing, and we're seeing those early signs. And so things are moving in the right direction. They're moving in the right direction. We're not planting a flag in the sand, Madam Speaker, saying, job done, this is done. But I will not stand here and listen to those opposite think it's easy pickings to turn around and say that we're not trying to address the root causes of crime. All we care about is locking people up. Absolutely. People who present a risk to the community will be locked up. And as the Deputy Chief Minister has said 1,000 times over, if you commit a crime in the Northern Territory, we will find a bed for you. And I'm sorry, but cramped prison facilities will never be a reason that this government doesn't hold someone accountable under the law. Because if you don't want to live in a hot, cramped cell, here's a news flash for you. Don't perpetrate crime on innocent people. And you can live in your house and with your job, pay for your own air conditioning. But we won't be giving free rides over here, Madam Speaker, and we will find a bed. We will support our corrections officers. Not only have we brought online more beds, we've graduated 31 corrections officers. There's 33 in the college right now, and there's 20-odd G4S out there providing support and relief to our corrections officers through prisoner transfers. Where was Labor in all of that? We have 2 Labor members opposite out of 4. Half of their team were the Corrections Minister, and they were the Attorney General who looks after our courts. And yet we've had to emergency fund legal aid. We've had to stand up the Tiger team to do the assessments. It was, the opposition leader is not very happy about how long people are sitting on remand. Yeah, neither are we. That is exactly the mess that we are cleaning up, which you left behind as Attorney General. The Tiger Task Force, just for one example, had a person who was on remand from March last year. In one day, they resolved the matter. This person sat on remand for a year. It took our Tiger team one day to resolve it. This is the backlog and the chaos we are working through. And so we do need a more efficient system, because efficient justice is good justice. We don't want people sitting on remand, I think an average of 130 days in the local court and 400 in the Supreme Court. Huge, huge delays. But again, we've done more in 8 months than Labor did in 8 years. So they're saying they support it today. They've had their pot shots across the chamber. But the reality is, if what you were doing was working, we wouldn't be standing here today. And I thank Samara Laverty for joining us today in the chamber to strengthen Declan's law. The fact that we've even wandered 5,000 people in 8 months is huge. That is an untold number of crimes that never happened. And people forget that. It is the untold number of crimes that have never happened that we can all take heart in and use to fuel us to keep going. But we have an entire system geared up after the Royal Commission and coronial after coronial and every other report by someone who wants to cuddle someone better, that has focused the entire system on the historical trauma of offenders instead of the trauma of victims and the community who live traumatised by the fear and the threat of becoming the next victim. The shop owners locking their doors, the mums not letting their kids play in the park or ride their bike on the street, the seniors who go to shop at Woolworths in Katherine at 7 a.m. because they're scared to go any later in the day, the people who don't take their kids out with them because they're afraid. The list goes on and on and on. Where there has been no consideration in our system about the trauma and the impact on our community, on our people, on our way of life, on mental health and well-being. And that is a critical factor moving forward. And so whilst there are many provisions in Section 24 and Section 24A which judges must consider, none have explicitly provided that overarching explicit instruction by the Parliament to consider community safety. And we've not done it once, we've done it twice in this iteration of the bill today. And so yes, more people will be remanded, and yes, that will put pressure on corrections, and so be it. Because if that means that judges have been bailing people who presented a risk to the community, I'll stand by these laws every day of the week. Because if a judge determines you're a risk to the community, you don't deserve to be in the community. Madam Speaker, the bill before us is straightforward. It provides 2 new tests around community safety and around whether or not there will be a risk of continued offending. It removes the presumption of detention as last resort to provide greater flexibility and intervention in a young person's life, because you'd rather be picked up by police at 13 and then provided support and wraparound services through Territory Families at that point than be an 18-year-old violent offender. That's the reality. In a perfect world, no one will ever engage with the system, but people are at rates we've never seen before. And again, it comes back to my point around parental and personal responsibility. So, Madam Speaker, I again thank everyone for their contribution. I'm pleased to see the support across the chamber. I know the member for Goroja could not join us today, but I thank him also for providing a contribution. Sorry, Mulca, for the member, through the member for Johnston, and I note her decision to fence sit while lecturing me about leadership today. Madam Speaker, I'd really like to thank Erin and Hannah and the entire team from the Attorney General's Department. We have had people working overtime on this issue, and what we have is a really important product that is going to be fit for purpose and ensure that community safety is no longer just the priority of the CLP government. It has been made today, or hopefully will be made today, a priority that the judges must consider each and every time they're determining whether someone should be at liberty or not. And I think it's only a reasonable expectation of the community that if a person is to be at liberty, that they do not present a high risk to the people. So I thank everyone, Madam Speaker, and I commend the bill to the House.
The question is the bill be now read a second time. Those of that opinion say aye. To the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The clerk.
A bill for an act to amend the Bail Act 1982 and the Youth Justice Act 2005.
Chief Minister.
Madam Speaker, I seek leave to move the third reading.
Is leave granted?
Aye.
There be no objection. Leave is granted. Chief Minister.
Madam Speaker, I move that the bill now be read a third time.
The question is that the bill be now read a third time. Those of that opinion say aye. To the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The clerk.
A bill for an act to amend the Bail Act 1982 and the Youth Justice Act 2005.
Leader of Government Business.
Madam Speaker, I move that the Assembly do now adjourn.
The question is that the Assembly adjourn. Those of that opinion say aye. To the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The Assembly stands adjourned until 10 a.m. on Tuesday the 13th of May 2025 or such other time and or date as may be advised pursuant to standing orders.